Aloha, this is Samo Guy in Hawaii, and if the first half of this video doesn't melt your brain, the second half just might. Fair warning, math or at least math-adjacent content ahead. So, you should stop farming this or that boss 100 times on a given difficulty setting just to determine comparative drop rates, okay? Because unless the actual underlying drop chance of whatever it is you're trying to determine is really high, meaning 40%, 50% or more, 100 runs tells us nothing. This is not a defense of the drop rates, whatever they actually are. If we do 100 runs and get 15 drops, that does not mean the drop rate is 50%. Another 100 runs and we may get 8. Do another and we may get 20. Do another and we may get a lot more or less than that. The reasons 100 runs doesn't work are sample size and margin of error. Let me explain. People do statistical studies all the time. Posters do it, medical researchers do it, scientists in various disciplines do it. There are long-standing mathematical formulas used to determine how to properly interpret data gathered from these studies. Okay, this is a website which simplifies some of those tools. This page provides us with a pair of tools dealing with sample size. The first tells us the minimum sample size required for a poll or study that will verify or refute what we believe to be, in our example, a possible drop rate. Okay, we'll come back to this later in the video. The second, which is what we want, tells us how accurate or close our given results are to the actual underlying drop rate for a given sample size. Okay, 95% is the confidence level. This basically tells us the results we get here will be valid on average 95% of the time. This is a very common, very high standard of accuracy and reliability. Okay, sample size is the number of runs, 100. Population proportion is the actual number of drops we get in those 100 runs expressed as a percentage of those runs. So let's say we get 15 drops out of 100, that's 15%. Population size will be blank because it's unlimited. It's infinite. We can farm and farm and farm forever. There is no limit to how big the population can be. We plug all that in and press the button and we get a margin of error of plus or minus 7%. What does that mean? That means that even though we got 15 drops and observed 15% drop rate out of a sample size of 100, there's a 95% probability that the actual drop rate could be anywhere between 8%, which is 15 minus 7% of the sample size, and 22, which is 15 plus 17% of the sample size. Okay, huge variation because relatively small sample size. Okay? Let's say we do 100 runs on one difficulty set and get 20 drops. Margin of error is 7.84%. Then we do another 100 on a different difficulty setting and get 8. Margin of error of 5.32%. There's a 95% chance that the underlying drop chance for the 20 drop run is as low as 12.16%. And the underlying drop chance for the 8 drop run is as high as 13.32%, meaning there's an overlap, meaning the actual underlying drop rate for both could be the same, between 12.16% and 13.32%. Okay, so that's the simple answer, but it then brings up at least two questions. One, what if there's no overlap? And two, how many runs is enough to tell? Okay, fair warning, this is where the video may really melt your brain. In order to answer those questions, we need to go back to the calculator and go into some detail about confidence level. A 95% confidence level means that if we run this test 100 times, meaning we do 100 runs of this boss with their 15% drop chance item 100 times, or 100 people each do 100 runs of said boss under the same conditions, if we do that, on average, 95 of those test results will fall within this range. 95 of those tests should produce between 8 and 22 drops. But for an average of 5 of those tests, 5% of the time, the results will fall outside of that range, less than 8 or more than 22, because we have to remember that we are talking about probability and chance. Anything is possible. It is possible to kill a boss with an item with a 15% drop chance 100 times and get nothing. It is also possible to kill that same boss 100 times and get 100 of those items. Both of those are possible. Highly improbable, but possible. But here's the thing. Which do you think of those two is more likely to occur? It's the get nothing result. Okay, if something has a 15% chance to happen, it has an 85% chance to not happen. Okay, and the lower the chance for something to happen, the more likely it is that it won't happen. Okay, confidence level takes this sort of thing into account. What we need to understand here is that just because there is no overlap between the margin of error between two separate sets of data does not necessarily mean there's an underlying difference between the two, okay? K6 recently farmed Axmal 500 times. He got 36 buzz axes, 15 bonds, and 15 kill springs. This would appear to indicate that the buzz axe may have a higher drop chance, and if we do the margin of error calculation at 95% confidence level, there is no overlap between the buzz axe and the other two. Now, do I think the buzz axe has a higher drop chance? No, I do not. Why would Gearbox even do that? Okay, I just think K6 had a run of bad luck, a 5% result. Now, McPorry in the comments to K6's video described running Axmal 1,000 times with the following results: Buzz Axe 53, 5.3%, Kill Spring 37, 3.7%, and BOD 32, 3.2%. Okay. The Buzz Axe again came out on top, but this time doing the math, there is an overlap. Okay, there is an overlap, and the overlap shows up even though this sample size was twice as large, which reduces the margins of error. Okay. Another thing to consider: confidence level does not have to be 95%. It can be smaller, it can be larger. We decide how accurate, how sure we need to be that our results reflect what's really going on and set that level appropriately. Medical trials typically use a much higher confidence level because we are dealing with people's health and we want to be very sure that this particular new drug, for instance, has the desired outcome. So I've already casually mentioned that increasing the sample size without changing anything else lowers the margins of error. Increasing the confidence level without changing the sample size increases the margins of error. Okay. The more sure we want to be about the accuracy of our results, confidence level, the more runs we need to do, sample size. Okay. If we take K6 results and plug them in again with a 99% confidence level, we get these margins of error, and now there is an overlap. Okay. So what should our confidence level be? And more importantly, getting back to that second question and what's implied by the video title, how big a sample size is big enough? Well, it depends on what we're trying to do. We are either trying to determine an actual drop rate, or we are trying to determine the difference in, as the game itself says, loot quality between levels of difficulty. In both cases, however, we need to define how accurate we need the results to be. Do we want to know the drop rate within 1%, 0.5%? If we are comparing loot quality between difficulty levels, because each level from hard on up says increased loot quality, we need to define what loot quality means and then how big a difference we think exists between each level of difficulty. Okay. Again, do we think the difference in quality is 2%, 1%, 0.5%? Okay. That minimum difference plus our level of confidence will determine how big a sample size we need. So let's assume we need accurate results within 1%. Okay. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that the chance for, call it above average loot quality, whatever that means, is 5% in easy and normal mode, 6% in hard, 7% in UVH1, etc. Okay, that means we need results with margins of error less than 1%. Otherwise, we can't be sure there is a difference. So I'm going to use a maximum margin of error of 0.99%, and we will stick with 95% confidence level. Okay, the first formula on the page is designed to calculate minimum sample size. We plug in 5% population proportionate at 95% confidence level and with a maximum margin of error of 0.99%, and we get 1862. Okay, that's 5%, it's 1,862. What about 6%? 2211, and it goes up 7%, 2552. That's the potential size of numbers we are looking at. Okay, that's for a 1% difference, but remember, we don't know what the actual difference is at this point. If the difference is 1% or more, we're fine. If it's less than 1%, we can't be sure. We need even larger sample sizes. But at least now you hopefully get an idea of the huge sample sizes needed to really determine what's going on. My advice, unless you are prepared to really slog it out, stop doing these tests. Wait for the data miners to eventually figure out how to pull the actual rates from the program files directly. You're better off just playing the game and farming for what you want or need, and dealing with the ups and downs of RNG such as they are. Again, not a defense of the current drop rates, just an explanation of how things work. If you're interested, I've also linked the second website in the description that does a pretty good job of explaining many of these concepts. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more, you know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe, stay safe, and thanks for watching.